For 3.5 years while this conflict has raged, or 3 years while it's raged, no one else has been able to bring something together like what we saw today, because Donald Trump is the only leader in the world that can. So no one is being sidelined here. But President Trump is in a position that he campaigned on to initiate a process that could bring about an end to this conflict. And from that could emerge some very positive things for the United States, for Europe, for Ukraine, for the world. But first it begins by the end of this conflict. And so the only thing President Trump's trying to do is bring about peace. It's what he campaigned on. It's something the world should be thanking President Trump for doing. He's been able to achieve what for 2.5, 3 years, no one else has been able to achieve, which is to begin this process, a serious process. Obviously, a lot of work remains before we have a result. But President Trump's the only one that can do it.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about the Trump administration's efforts in bringing peace to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We watched Joe Biden and his 4 years of the administration, at least the part where this conflict was taking place, make the full commitment to never stop sending money that way. But you didn't really hear a lot about forceful, peaceful initiations, the goal to actually stop the war. It seemed like the goal was to fund the Ukraine side of the war, and it looks like there's a change of wind here in what's taking place in this tumultuous part of the world. Let's talk to our friend Jim Carafano about it, the senior counselor to the president and E.W. Richardson Fellow for International Engagement at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, sir. Thanks for having me.
Of course. When you were watching the Trump administration navigate the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we knew during the campaign, Donald Trump said very boastfully he could get this war done and over with very quickly. Is he making good on that promise in the negotiations he's engaging in right now?
Well, he said he can end the war in 24 hours, and the reality is he could have if Putin had said yes. Putin did not say yes. But the reality is when the war ends, Putin will get exactly what he could have gotten if he had said yes in the first 24 hours. Look, I've only been watching people deal with the Russians for 50 years, so really, what do I know? But because the Russians are very predictable negotiators. First of all, the Russians will always start out by asking for everything, because their goal is to always get everything at the negotiating table that they can't win on the battlefield. And the Russians like to understand their adversaries. When their adversaries are willing to give them something for nothing, the Russians know they have a patsy and they ask for more. So we shouldn't be surprised that the Russian position coming out of the box was, well, we want everything. And they're likely going to get nothing, get absolutely nothing. The United States and no one should give the Russians any single thing at the negotiating table that they don't own on the battlefield. Acknowledging that what the Russians have done on the battlefield and that nobody's willing to underwrite their complete and utter defeat, that's just acknowledging reality. Having said that, making concessions to the Russians is a huge mistake. That only invites more conflict in the future. I think the administration gets that. After all, they live with these guys for 4 years. They know how to negotiate that. People forget that Donald Trump is probably one of the most experienced leaders on the world stage today. He was president for 4 years. He probably knows more world leaders than anybody else. He spent 4 years preparing for this job. This is not this, guy from New York that does real estate, walking into this negotiation. This is one of the world's most experienced and, quite honestly, one of the most talented leaders and the head of the most powerful country on earth, and at the current time, one of the most popular presidents that the United States has ever had. This is a guy going into the game, and there are 52 cards in the deck, and he's got 52, and the other guy's holding a joker.
No, that's very well put. Jim Carafano with us right now. I think that the people like me who are listening to experts like you try to make sense of what's going on over there and questioning what the American responsibility and involvement needs to be in this conflict. I just very simply put, Jim, I want to know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And I'm asking you to tell me, in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Putin and Zelensky, is there a good guy and a bad guy?
Well, absolutely. This is not even up for discussion. The Russians invaded a country without pretext, without anything other than the thought of naked aggression. There is no moral equivalency here. And when people say, well, the U.S. is going to be, neutral, they're going to be tough on both sides, that's nonsense. First of all, the Ukrainians are already all in. The Ukrainians want exactly what the United States wants. They're realistic. They want a ceasefire. They want the fighting to stop. There is no argument between them and Donald Trump on anything. There's only one party here, which is the Russians. And the only thing, it only gets worse for the Russians. The only hope that they have is that they hold out and the West falls apart, or the United States gets bored and walks away. And I can tell you, that's not going to happen. And you know why it's not going to happen? Because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to walk into a negotiation and saying, I just don't want a deal. I want a deal that's good, that defends my interests. And then the other guy says, no, you can't have that. And then Donald Trump says, oh, okay, forget it. I'll just leave and get nothing. I don't care. I mean, come on.
Jim, we got a commenter here who wants to know, what kind of say does Ukraine have in these negotiations? Russia obviously invading Ukraine, the United States coming in with Donald Trump now over Joe Biden. That's a very different negotiating situation. Right. What's Ukraine's role and responsibility here?
Well, I think I think Ukraine and the United States are already of one mind on this conflict. Of course, the Ukrainian president says there's no deal without me, and I'm not going to sign up for anything until I see the thing. But essentially, Ukraine already knows what the U.S. position is. We want a ceasefire. We want the fighting to stop. We want to save as many Ukrainians as possible. We are not going to demand for all of the return of Ukrainian land. The Russians aren't going to give it all back. Now, the Russians own you some Ukrainian land. The Ukrainians own some Russian land. They might want to trade some of that with each other. We don't care. The Ukrainians already know this, and the Ukrainians know that the United States wants to invest in the country after the war. That we're going to continue to support NATO. So anything you hear from the Ukrainians, which says, well, we want to say and everything, that's for domestic consumption or reassure people. It's not speaking to the United States. They already know the United States really has their back on this. And I know people say, well, why do we care? Well, the same people who say, why do we care, voted for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump says we are better off with a free and independent Ukraine that's not controlled by Russia. And the reason why he says that's for one very simple reason, not because of money laundering, but because it's in U.S. interests that Russia be stopped. Because that makes our job in Europe easier. It makes our allies' job easier. It allows us to focus more resources on China. There's no scenario where the United States is better off with the Ukraine that's conquered by the Russians. Trump's just a realist. He doesn't want to see innocent Ukrainians die. Of course, he'd like to see a free and independent country. But in the end, Donald Trump is going to do exactly what he said. I'm going to put America's interests first. And it's in America's interest that there be a free and independent Ukraine. Arguably, to be honest, we'd probably be better off if we just let the Russians die forever, because the longer they fought, the weaker they get, and the less of a problem they are for us. This isn't about honestly, Trump is actually doing something by trying to stop the war and putting his own credibility on the line as president of the United States, because he said, I'm going to end this. So he is putting his word, the United States of America, on the line here. That's to save innocent Ukrainian lives. And I wish people were just more appreciative of that.
That's a great perspective. Here with Jim Carafano, the foreign policy expert we speak to each week from the Heritage Foundation. You talked about, obviously Donald Trump's in for what's best for the United States, but you've also mentioned the allies. Donald Trump is maybe sort of icing out some of the European countries who want to be involved in these Ukraine talks. Emmanuel Macron hosts this emergency meeting of European leaders yesterday to discuss whatever the plan might be with this war. What do you make of Donald Trump's decision and the reaction of these leaders out of Europe who feel a little bit left out now in these negotiation processes?
Yeah, well, look, they're just a bunch of yahoos. First of all, look, you can't have a meeting with 87 people at the table who don't have 87 equal parts in this fight. Luxembourg is going to have a seat at the table. I mean, really? And their opinion is going to carry. That actually dilutes the strength of the negotiating position. So meeting with these actors individually actually strengthens the U.S.'s role. And if you actually look at this emergency meeting that Macron called in Paris, Did they talk at all about the things that J.D. Vance talked about? Like, what are you doing about your democracy? No. Basically, they got together and they said a bunch of things which are actually reaffirming of exactly what Donald Trump wants. He wants a stronger Europe. So the Macron meeting actually only strengthened the U.S. negotiating position against the Russians because the Europeans say they're going to pony up more for their own defense and pony up more to spend Ukraine, which is, by the way, exactly what President Trump wants. So J.D. Vance went to Berlin and scolded these guys, and then they, run and made a meeting and basically said, we support Donald Trump. That's what happened.
Jim Carafano speaking with us right now. Kind of to wrap this up, we've got what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, which is a geographically much closer situation for a lot of these European countries, of course, but we've seen some effects, some conservative, politically conservative movement in Europe, certainly in Italy with
Right.
Meloni. Is there a Trump effect happening politically in other countries right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's like, Trump is like Red Bull, right? So it's these guys have already been drinking coffee all morning, and then somebody handed them a Red Bull. So there has been a European conservative movement that's rising in Europe and in Canada, by the way, and also in Latin America. Trump has just added a lot of Red Bull to that because people like him and Meloni and Modi and Milei have demonstrated both success at the ballot box, but also success on the ground. And so what conservatives and populists can do is they could stand up and say, look, it's not just that we say we have a different way of doing things, but look, the people that are following the agenda that we're promoting, they're winning, they're successful. Part of the reason why you saw this incredibly negative feedback on Vance's speech is you were talking to all the wrong people. So European elites are, their hair's on fire. And of course, in America, we're just listening to this and we're going, oh, the Europeans hate us. But what we actually never did was talk to Europeans. I have a network of hundreds of European conservatives. And, when I emailed them about the speech, all the emails I got back were positive. I mean, like one was like maybe, 80, 70, 30, positive. I didn't like this. But overwhelmingly, European conservatives said, oh, my God, this is exactly what we have said if we had a chance to yell at those yahoos in here.
And really, what is the heart of whatever that Trump or populist effect might be that other countries find so attractive? Social, economic? What is it about?
Well, it's essentially good governance. It's government that actually delivering on the needs of the people. And, it's funny because that you asked that question because, I go all over the world, whether I'm in Africa or Latin America or Europe, I often hear many of the same issues. Why is the government telling me what my family policies should be and what kind of genders I should have? Why is the government telling me we can't have affordable energy? Why is the government telling me we have to have open borders and massive illegal immigration? Why can't I have a good life? Why can't I work hard all day and then go home at the end and benefit from the fruits of my own labor? Why are people saying, kill the Jews? I mean, didn't we decide like decades ago that was a bad idea? So, no matter where you go, whether you call yourself center right or conservative or classical liberal or NatCon or FreeCon or, neocon, I don't care. Everybody says why isn't government delivering for us? And that really was the message that J.D. Vance was saying, kind of the emperor has no clothes, is you are not delivering for your own people. The purpose of government is to not weaponize government to destroy your political opposition and eliminate civil liberties in your country. That's not what government is for. And so the reason why the Trump message resonates is people want a government works for them. And people say, sometimes, this person is a crazy guy and, they're taking money from the Russians or they're in bed with it. And you know what? Maybe they are a crazy guy. Maybe they are taking money from the Russians or whatever. But why are people voting for them? They're not voting for them because they're taking money from the Russians. They're voting for them because their governments are terrible, and they're going to vote for somebody who says we can do better.
It's interesting to see globally a commonality among the sensibilities that we all have in this human race. And some people might call it common sense, but it's great to see it kind of coming back
Right.
across
And
countries.
there are people that there are people that try to exploit that, right? For example, the scammer that calls you on the phone and says, "Well, don't you want to help out the people suffering from wildfires in California? Please send us $50," and you do because you want to help out, but it's just a scam. So there are people out there who are, what I would call scam populists, right? I want to solve all your problems, and they really don't. They're working for the Chinese, they're working for the Russians, they're really Nazis. I don't know, but overwhelmingly, the rise of populism in the world today, whether it's in Latin America or the United States or Canada or Europe, is because people have seen what is over the horizon with globalist governments and these elites telling them how to live their lives. And they have said that is not what we signed up for. We signed up for a government that is by the people and for the people, not a government that is over the people.
Man, well put. We appreciate you, Jim. Thanks for being with us today. We look forward to having you back each week.
All right. Thanks, my friend.
Take care. Bye-bye.